We're going to go on to the next mandate because this podcast is called Mandate Madness. And the next one is mandating fewer places to vote in person.
Oh, boy.
And that's the next one. It's government basically saying, you know, all those places that you used to be able to vote at in person?
You can't do it.
We're limiting them to such an extent that now we're going down to 10% of where we were before.
Yeah.
So
most notably in California. I mean, you know,
that's
the
exactly
most densely populous state, well, not sorry, that's New Jersey, but like the most populated state in the country in terms of just sheer number of people, with the largest cities, LA, San Francisco, San Diego, Sacramento. I mean, the amount of voting centers necessary to accommodate the size of this country is absurd. And meanwhile, the governor is just, in an effort to promote vote by mail, universal VBM, he's just closed down a bunch of the polling locations.
Which is so dangerous,
Which
right?
to me is astonishing because, like, I mean, you see it as like this I see it as like, it's almost hypocritical. I mean, you know, Democrats, I like saying this because it's just funny because it's the way everybody does it. I am old enough to remember 2018 when Stacey Abrams was wrongfully denied the governorship.
You mean
of
Governor
Georgia.
Stacey Abrams of
I'm
Georgia?
sorry, she is. You know, you mean
Shadow
Vice
governor.
President-elect or Vice President nominee Stacey
right.
Abrams, because she should have won that too, but it was denied to her.
So she thinks.
Or so she thinks. But anyway, so Stacey Abrams was denied the governorship, air quotes, because she didn't. Because Brian Kemp, who was then Secretary of State, closed down all the polling locations, which also, if you know how things are done, a lot of these decisions are made by local state boards of election that are generally a result of staffing issues.
And they weren't closed.
And they weren't closed.
They were not closed.
Anyways, and then
they were. By the way,
they usually
they were closed on time. But go ahead.
And they close on time. And if there's like an issue with a bunch of people lined up, you know, usually the state boards are very okay with extending voting hours.
Of course.
It's just like I've seen elections lost because of that. But
yes.
anyways, you know, so you get this in Georgia, but then you come over here to California, where basically the same action's being taken. I mean, voting places are closed, but it's good. It's good for the vote because we're going for vote by mail, which to me in its own right is going to be an absolute colossal, like, you know, I don't personally see an issue with absentee voting, you know, vote by mail if you request a ballot and things like that. But the business of the state to just mandate that we're going to mail millions to everybody who's registered.
There's a problem. You know, it's interesting. There's a problem already in New York with the primary election in New York City.
Here in Maryland, there was an issue
where they may have declared the winner
incorrectly.
Yet they were correct, and they decided, well, we're not going to count. You know, all the ballots because there's so many of them. How would we do that?
Yeah.
We've had an issue in Maryland. We've had issues
New
across
Jersey,
the country.
in
New
the
Jersey.
Northeast, there was a primary election, and so this one
we talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about it. I mean, they had to throw out hundreds, if not thousands, of ballots just because of issues, and it's like, you know, we here in Maryland, we had ballots go down to North Carolina. North Carolina ballots come to us. Some ballots that were promised to be mailed to all voters didn't even make it in the mail. I mean, if you thought the 2000 election was colossal confusion with, you know, dimpled chads and vote by mail issues and, you know, absentee ballots, I mean, and that took 2 or 3
Hanging
weeks.
chads, you know.
It took 2 or 3 weeks to sort that out. I mean, just from a sheer logistical standpoint.
And of course, that happened to happen in a county, a Democrat county, in the state of Florida, where they completely had
dropped the ball.
Yeah, I mean, they completely dropped the ball.
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting. There are prominent people across the country who are continuously saying, including many elected Democrats, if not all of them, but they're saying things like, well, there is no issue with mail-in voting. And there's this guy that is a professor in the state of Maryland at a state college, and I'm going to call him out. His name's Todd Eberly. He's a professor. He teaches among other things, I presume, I haven't looked recently at what he's teaching, but generally speaking, it's in the area of American history, politics, government, these kinds of subject matters, and perhaps other subjects as well. He recently tweeted that there is no problem, and there has been shown no problem, and there hasn't been a problem with mail-in voting anywhere in the United States.
Yeah.
This is a professor, ladies and gentlemen. This is a professor tweeting that. And literally, in real time, we're seeing it all across the country. And I have yet another anecdote for you. Yet another one. My daughter's getting married next month. She mailed out her invitations on Monday of last week. So we're now talking 11 days,
Yeah, people still haven't gotten them.
and there are people who still haven't gotten them.
Yeah.
So here is the issue. And she mailed them out regular mail. Here's the issue with mail-in ballots. Once you give up the chain of custody of your ballot, the ballot's in your hand. Once that chain of custody is passed on to someone other than the election,
You are at the
folks,
mercy of them.
you don't know what's going to happen.
No idea.
You have no idea what's going to happen. Do millennials understand that? That is where I'm going with this.
No, and to me it's astonishing because they want vote by mail. They want universal vote by mail. And let's not, my position as a millennial Republican is that, I don't believe in VBM just because, or universal VBM, because if you just look at the numbers of turnout, right? You have so we'll say you have 100,000 registered voters, in an area, maybe half of them vote. So you're doing just the logistical work of mailing out 50,000 ballots to people who won't even bother to return them. I mean, I think if you want to vote by mail, then all you have to do is go to your state board. For most states, I don't know how it is everywhere, but here in Maryland, I know here in Jersey, it's the same way. You just go to your state board of elections website, you request a vote by mail ballot, and they ship it directly to you. And it takes like a week. It's not a big deal. But to just mandate that we're going to close polling locations, which to me is astonishing. Because if you want to go vote by mail, vote in person, you should be able to vote in person. I would also rather you have a bunch of polling places with smaller lines than cramming all these people into one or two voting locations.
That's why they're doing it.
Where there's
That's why they're doing it.
Yeah, and to me, but only Republicans do voter suppression. We're the bad guys. But I don't know.
And look, once again, the chain of custody of your ballot is everything. When you go and vote in person, you fill out your ballot, and you know that when you hand your ballot to the polling worker, the chain of custody is finished because they scan that ballot right in front of you.
And it's already recorded.
And then typically provide you a receipt.
Yeah.
And so there's a scanned copy of your ballot, and then there's the hard copy that they retain. And this happens in most states. But as soon as you get rid of that chain of custody and it goes from you to the mailbox, who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows how long it's going to take, who is touching it, and I'm sorry, it doesn't work. We've shown it again and again and again, especially on this large scale. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I get millennials want the convenience because millennials are all about ordering from Amazon.
I don't think it's as convenient as people think it will be. I mean, you will see so many issues with people not getting ballots, getting wrong ballots, incorrect ballots. When they mail it back, their ballots won't go in. And this is something I want to segue, talk about as an aside. I saw it in the news yesterday in the headlines, and it was Trump was talking about universal VBM, and
explain what that is.
Universal vote by mail is what we're talking about as this topic. But so there's financial issues with the post office in general, who would be handling all of your ballots. I will not go into my tirade about how we should handle the post office. I will save that for another episode. But anyways, so they need a bailout. The Democrats want to just hand them $3 billion to conduct vote by mail. The president was like, no, I don't want to give them $3 billion because it'll be used for vote by mail. And then they were like, the media was all up in arms. And everybody who knows me, listens to the show, knows that I'm not going to go out of my way to defend anything I think is wrong. But I really do think that everybody kind of mischaracterized what he was saying, because to them, they just see him as authoritarian. Like, this is our first shocking thing towards open voter suppression and open authoritarianism, and that we're not going to give everybody the free and fair election. All he was saying is that there is a negotiation on Capitol Hill, that Congress actually has to do something. Congress has to come together and make a deal to fund the post office, and if they want to do these things, then they can put it in the funding bill. But you have to agree on a bill and make a deal. And, and this is the problem, is people want to do these programs, but they also want to expedite them. They don't want to do it the correct way. They don't they don't want Congress to work. They don't want Congress to make a bill, make concessions, and actually do their job.
And they don't want to reform the post office, which needs an enormous amount of reform.
Enormous reform. But then you get the headlines in the mail or in the news saying, Trump's against VBM. Trump's, going to take away your free and fair election.
Aren't you concerned, though, that with vote by mail, that the post office delivers an enormous amount of packages for Amazon?
Yeah.
And they do so at a loss. So the American taxpayers are actually subsidizing the mailing through the USPS of Amazon packages.
That was
And
one
aren't
of
you
the things that
concerned
Trump
that
did
with
that I thought was smart.
if we had voting by mail, where I'm going with this is if we have voting by mail and it's at a very large scale and scaled up as a result of COVID, and it's nationwide, if you will, couldn't Amazon dump even more of their packages on the USPS and really screw up this election if they really wanted to? Because Amazon has undue influence on the USPS, and that is, I'm sorry, I'm not one of these people that's paranoid. It's the opposite. I'm a critical thinker, and I think about all the possibilities and why it's a bad idea.
Yeah, well, like, you could, maybe they do it, I could potentially see, a instance where there was something they did on purpose, but just think about, all the other mail going on in the world right now. I mean, we're at a time where e-commerce is at an all-time high. Just the amount of packages and online goods being shipped in the mail. I mean, just, heaven forbid, early November turns into a really busy week at the post office. We could talk about absurd amounts of delays in mail.
Yes.
And your vote might not get counted.
People start shopping for Christmas around then.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, that's what amazes me about this idiot Todd Eberle, who's a professor. And I'll go back to him because he's supposed to be teaching young people who are in college critical thinking skills, and instead he's tweeting out, "Oh no, suspend all of your critical thinking skills. Voting by mail, there's never been a problem.
It's emotional appeals that don't take into account externalities. I mean, when we talk about all of these policies, everybody just sees them as a flat slogan, socialize, or what is it? Medicare for all, universal vote by mail, these things, look, they all sound good,
Always.
You get this great thing and it's going to be done in this great way. But when you actually think about the manpower and like all of the logistics, just from like a logistical perspective, how difficult all of this stuff is, it's not as simple as just waking up one morning and snapping your fingers and the president writes a little decree on paper and bam, it happens. It really isn't. And this is something that I think my generations older than me, just anybody who's a really, emotionally driven person fails to take into consideration.
Because they're trusting.
They're trusting. They think it is as easy as people say it is, but it just isn't.
No, it's not.